To put context this, while Chicostart is a host of many startups and is a ecosystem resource for small business, I am also a regional advisor for the NorCal SBDC Finance Center. And so the PPP and the EIDL are now part of my vernacular. Because of that, it's also a fast-moving train. I want to make the opportunity for our community to have an expert from the bank be able to contribute to sharing their learnings and their updates to how this program is being rolled out, has been rolled out, and is now being managed, because there's always lots of updates to what's going on in our ever-changing world. With that in mind, I'm going to let you know that that we have here today our resident expert, Mr. Phil Aviles. And am I saying your last name right, Phil?
Yes, that's correct. You nailed it.
Okay. Sometimes I really am bad at last names, so I appreciate your patience with me. And we'll have Phil talk about the PPP program and what, from a U.S. bank perspective, and how they're managing that, and what the updates are, since this has been a whirlwind 3 months. Phil, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Eva. So first of all, I appreciate you all having me on to chat with you today. One of the challenges, just to kind of give a little disclosure here, one of the challenges that I'm going to have is I can share with you guys the information that has been posted on the SBA's website, and that Eva has access through the SBDC to. However, U.S. Bank is not in an advisory position. So I'll have to kind of walk a fine line in some areas where I can't exactly advise, but I can certainly share and discuss the information that's out there, and shed any light that I can add through my experiences interacting with these programs. So I believe, were you guys going to put the little presentation that you had prepared up, the slideshows, or how would you like to do that, Eva?
Yeah, actually, Tim, do you have that we sent to you last week?
I do.
Thank you. So yes, so Phil, I should have put that caveat in. While I do at the SBDC, I do advising, I am not with the bank. And while he's with the bank and they do the lending, they do not do the advising. It's an interesting, and while they do the lending, they do the lending for the SBA, right? So,
correct.
Right. So it's an interesting relay race in a way of.
Yeah. And I think one of the challenges has been so many businesses have unique circumstances, and in a normal environment, we would be able to work with our underwriters to understand what the unique characteristics are related to that specific business, and see if we can find a way to mitigate or work around getting it to fit within the parameters. But when it's SBA loan and we're merely issuing the loan on behalf of the SBA, we don't have that kind of capability. It's pretty cut and dry, and we're stuck in a hard box. And I think that's probably been a pain point for a lot of people in general, and not just with U.S. Bank, but in banking. I have lots of friends that are in the banking industry for other banks in town, and it seems to be that the pain point has been the stringency of the program itself, and of course the banks have to underwrite to the guidelines that have been directed from the Treasury and the SBA, and we don't have the ability to consider, oh well, I understand how this could work because it doesn't quite meet this condition, but it does by A, B, and C. We don't have any of that leniency.
That is correct. That is correct. And the reason why it may have sounded like I emphasized that things are changing or have changed and there's updates and things like that is because literally a lot has changed from the beginning of the program to now. And even I have a hard time I'll hold on to this one piece of info. No, but it was this. And so I find myself always having to go back and re-reference the updates, because I learn things quickly, but I don't let go of things quickly.
Anyway, and even since you put this PowerPoint together, there have been changes.
I know, it's crazy. So folks, for those that'll be looking at this, yeah, so first of all, it's just say July. So my apologies, because this first was put together on behalf of Phil and I 2 weeks ago. Okay, so here's some stats before Phil runs into things, okay? U.S. employment in May of 2020 was approximately 30%. I don't care what numbers they gave you, because that's, they're saying, oh, it's only 18%. No, that's not. California unemployment, May 2020 was approximately 18%, and number of PPP loans distributed to California companies as of May was 6 billion. So, there's a lot going on in our economy, folks, and when there's a public health crisis, there's also a public economic crisis. So those are things we need to understand and that work hand in hand. Now, with that said, I'm actually looking at my paperwork. With that said, here's some updates. So one of the updates that we were trying to address is legislation signed off in June, the beginning of June, and it was called, I think it was called the Flexibility Act, if memory serves me correctly, and it's like an addendum to the existing PPP stuff. And the program was supposed to run out as of the last day of, as of July 1st, I believe, or 6th.
The initiative stated that the SBA was going to stop approving loans at 11:59 p.m. on June 30th. So if you did not, and I think that a good point of clarification to make is when you are applying for an SBA loan with your lender has the task of going through the due diligence and making sure that all the boxes are checked so that when it is turned around and submitted to the SBA, approval is immediately issued and there's no issues with compliance on that side. And I think that a lot of people that I worked with initially were under the impression that as soon as they had applied with the bank, that immediately got sent to the SBA, but we had to make sure that we had a complete package and that it was in compliance with the SBA standards before we could even then submit to the SBA to obtain that approval code. And that approval code from the SBA is not a guarantee. It is a conditional approval stating that those funds have been reserved should all of the conditions be met to fund.
Yeah. And then as of, I don't know, 8:30 p.m. June 30th, they changed the PPP deadline to August 8th. And not all lenders were willing to sign back up and jump over that hurdle again. So is that fair to say, Phil?
I do not have a list of who is on board yet and who is not, but you are correct. I know that we at US Bank are participating in this next round again. Any of the applications that were still in that underwriting stage that did not get a SBA approval code, we're picking those back up where we left off, and we are going to be continuing to accept new applications as well.
Right. So to put closure to that topic, the PPP applications deadline has now been extended to August 8th. The next piece was that changed as of the beginning of June was the covered period. So the original PPP loans were for an 8-week period. Please go back to the other slide. Thank you. And now it's 24 weeks. And it's a choice, though. You're not set to keep the 8. You don't have to take the 24. We advise people who were, since a lot of this was coming down the pipe around the time some people were already getting close to completing their 8 weeks, we advise, this is where I'm using that word carefully, right? We advise people that it's probably best for them to stick to the 8 weeks and wait to hear from their lender for the forgiveness application, okay? For those companies that were not able to use it up in the 8 weeks, for many, and there's many examples. We're talking about restaurants, we're talking about salons, we're talking about others that were not given the green light to open. We advise, but they can do whatever they want, right? That advise that they go over the 24 weeks if that still works for them, because it gives, and then there's been also another shift that's now a segue into the percentage of forgiveness. So if you got, say, hypothetically $1,000 or $100, okay, originally that $100, 75% or more, $75 or more in this case, right? 75% or more could be used for payroll, and 25% or less were used for rent, utilities, and mortgage interests. As of the legislation that was signed at the beginning of June, not only did the covered period change, but also the percentage of forgiveness. Now it's 60% or more can be used for payroll, and 40% or less can be used for rent, utilities, and mortgage interest. Phil, do you want to expand on that?
I think that's pretty clear.
Okay.
You know, I think that in addition to the 24-week time frame, my understanding is this was an attempt by the SBA when they updated the guidelines to make a much larger percent of businesses eligible for full forgiveness, because the feedback they were getting when it came close to starting that forgiveness application process, the feedback that they were getting was that many businesses were not even going to come close to being eligible to have the full forgiveness, even though they were following the plan to a T.
Yeah. So, and then there's also other new rules in there that if anybody has more questions on, they can either send me an email or go look up on their own, whatever they're most comfortable about, that have to do with forgiveness based on safe harbor. And we can talk about that later. They extended the deferral of the first repayment, so the first payment to repay against the PPP. And they've also extended the rehire deadline. So the rehire deadline was for this restoring the same amount of full-time employees for full forgiveness by December 31st, 2020. Before it had to be by the end of the period. Now it's, the end of the year, which is great. There again is also exemptions for COVID closures. Say that 5 times fast. COVID closures. And that also refers to what I mentioned a moment ago about safe harbor. And then lastly, there's also been an offer for payroll tax deferral. And so on any of those last couple pieces, Phil, do you want to expand on that a little bit?
The only thing that I would add is I believe I'm looking to see if it's kind of when they had the modifications, in addition to trying to think of how to properly say this without basically, my understanding is the previous legislation stated that if your first payment came due outside of that 8 weeks, which is now 24, but the original legislation, if your first payment came due, you still had to make that payment even if you were going through the forgiveness process.
Yes.
Now, if you're in process of applying for the forgiveness, that payment will get deferred, pushed back while you're in the application process. Are you familiar with something?
Yes, you're absolutely right, and that is dictated by the lender, and you can work through the lender on that. So that's also in the best interest of our impacted businesses. All right, Tim, go ahead and move on to the next slide. And so, actually, I would ask, before we go into open forum of 20 minutes Q&A with Phil, I would ask Phil to also go over U.S. Bank's experience thus far, and then anything else that I did not touch on.
Yeah, I think you did a really good job touching on the main points. The one thing that I would share is please utilize the resources provided by the SBA. Your lenders, your financial institutions that you're working with through the process, they're only going to be able to advise what specifically we're missing. So we might, have everything except we need a document that shows payroll covering this time frame. We can't tell you what documents we can accept. And I know that that's been, it's kind of a frustrating position to be in as a business owner. You're being told that you need to provide something, but you're not being told what that exactly can be. And then you submit something and it gets kicked back. Sorry, that doesn't qualify. So the SBA, although it can be very sometimes challenging to drill down to the finite bit of information you're looking for and all the vast information that's out there on this program, do your best to try to work with your CPA, work with if you have an attorney that handles your finance, do your best to work with them on figuring out what is the SBA's exact requirement, because somewhere in there it's spelled out pretty much without a doubt. It'll tell you, here's what can be used, here's what can't be used. And the most challenging position for us to be in as at the bank, we're normally advising our customers on what we would recommend in order for them to, be put in the best financial position. And we cannot advise in this program. So, it's been tricky to try to, we still want to help our customers be successful. We want to help see them, achieve the funding that they need to survive in this challenging time. But our hands are somewhat tied behind our backs. So please utilize the resources on the SBA's page is the biggest thing that I've learned, because there's so much information out there, and the SBA .gov really is going to tell you what is needed. The other reason I say go straight to the SBA's website for PPP, a lot of people will get information from another friend who's a business owner, and that person got it from another friend who heard this and that. And by the time it gets to the bank, it's close, but it's not exactly what we need to be able to check that box and move on. So that's the other reason to save yourself the headache of having to submit and resubmit. Really, make sure. I have lots of friends who give really good advice, and usually it's accurate, but in this instance, I would certainly encourage you to check on the SBA's website, reference that before you submit your package to the bank to make sure.
Indeed. All right. Let's open it up for questions, folks. Talk to us this is one of my favorite sayings. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I also would use that as a segue into one of the things that I've also been advising folks is to, if they have an accountant or CPA that helps them with their books, to make sure that they are lockstep with that person on this particular program in such a way that that person can also produce a certification that those funds were used for the eligible items. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah. Sounded right.
Yeah. I think so.
Okay. I think that's going to be.
Oh, sorry. Hypothetically, say you were a kind of a startup, pre-startup, whatever. You got a business license. You're a Chicostart. This is all hypothetical, mind you. Could your own salary that you kind of invent off the fly be used? I want to protect my paycheck that I haven't really started yet, and I've got this horrible rent I have to pay at Chicostart, and so I don't have any employees or anything except me. Is there something that could be done out of this, or is that a different ballgame?
No, absolutely. So Kent, you can apply. And if I was you, I would. Sole proprietors can definitely apply. Sorry, I was being kind of quiet because of the noise in the background.
Yeah.
You need to be able to show what your draw was for
Right.
January and February. Is that about right, Phil?
Yeah, and that has been the biggest challenge. If you are a new startup, how are you paying yourself in the first 2 months? A lot of new businesses are putting all their money into their business, and they're not necessarily paying themselves yet. So that has been the biggest challenge. I've had some. I guess I've been fortunate that I've worked with a couple of accountants or bookkeepers for businesses that have been able to get creative in the way that they were able to display how that business owner was paying themselves in the time frame from January 1st to February 29th. And because it was on official documentation that was acceptable by the SBA, we were able to get something through, and something's better than nothing, of course. But that is the biggest challenge is, the cycle of a startup is you invest in your business, right? You don't pay yourself right away. So that's a really great question. And there is an option there. I can tell you it won't be an easy application. Just have that expectation set going into it that there's going to be quite a bit of back and forth, and we're going to have to kind of work together to figure out what will ultimately work for you in the long run. And if you take that approach, then I don't think you'll be too disappointed with the outcome, as opposed to walking into it thinking it's going to go through like a breeze. Because I know that was the biggest misconception about the program is when it started, everyone thought they could just walk into their bank and have the funds in their account that afternoon. And we didn't even know in the banking industry if that was going to be the case or not until it wasn't. So
is SBA giving out loans, whether or not you get it forgiven or not? Let's say I wanted a loan like to cover some stuff in like 6 months or so. Is that happening still, or is that a separate deal?
It is completely separate, and it is still happening. SBA has a lot of loan programs. One thing that I can share with you, I don't know if this is going to make you want to get on the ball or not, but 7A and I believe 504, but 7A for sure, and Eva can probably advise on this. If you get your loan approved and funded before the end of September, the SBA in the CARES Act has a provision that states they're going to be paying 6 months principal and interest payments of your loan. And that's not a deferral. That's not any kind of tagging on, lumping it on the back end. That is pure payments, principal and interest that the SBA is making for you for 6 months on that loan. So challenge.
It's a totally sweet deal, guys.
Yeah. It's a fantastic program. The challenge, Kent, is, as you can imagine, in this type of environment, underwriting parameters are getting a bit tighter because there's so much uncertainty on what the long-term impact is going to be to the business industry and how each particular industry is going to be impacted by COVID. And with the aid that has been issued so far, it has certainly helped a lot of businesses stay afloat. But what the next question is how are they going to be looking 6 months to a year from now, or from after that aid's been used? And we don't know what the economy is going to be doing. We don't know what the business market's going to be doing. So that's been the biggest challenge in the underwriting process is we want to be able to demonstrate that your business is able to be agile. Agile is a big word in the business industry the last couple of years, and we want to see that you're going to be able to navigate this challenging market and stay afloat and stay financially successful. So part of it is not just that the banks don't want to lend money or the SBA doesn't want to lend money because we're worried about losing it. We also don't want to be putting our customers in a position where they're now having to, go through a painful legal process or any kind of negative circumstances that can come from not being able to repay a loan.
Phil, I've got a quick question. The forgiveness loan application, or the loan forgiveness application, does that get submitted to my lender or to SBA?
It'll be handled by your lender.
Okay, good.
My understanding is each lender,
right?
and each lender is going to have their own process. I would anticipate you should be getting either a phone call or an email, probably an email, but I don't know if it's a local enough lender. They may be calling out and reaching out directly, but you'll probably be getting a communication with the steps that will take place. I know we are planning on sending out those emails very shortly here in July to start setting expectations of the forgiveness application. We're going to be doing it digitally, so it's going to be through a link, and it'll be completing the forms, uploading the documents, and then those will get sent over to us to process on the back end.
So luckily, my lender is U.S. Bank, and my contact person is in San Luis Obispo. So I should be expecting an email from her in the next week or so, or
it'll probably be an email from our. So when you went through the application process, depending on at what point, the early applications, we actually emailed an invitation to apply.
Yeah.
So it'll come from probably a mass mailbox because it's being handled by kind of an automated systems, trying to streamline because as you can imagine, I believe we have over 100,000 businesses at U.S. Bank that have taken advantage of the PPP funds. So we've got to find a way to.
Yeah, and so when the loan application started going out, they prioritized clients, which is fine. Do you have any sense of how they're going to do that with the forgiveness applications? Or are they going to, start with clients? Or
I don't know what the order of logic would tell me.
Rush this time.
Right, logic would tell me that. The date that your funding occurred would influence what order you received an email to apply for forgiveness. Obviously, the ones that funded first are going to need to apply sooner. So that would make sense to me, but I can't confirm that on behalf of the bank. That's just me trying to think on my own, which I can get in trouble for. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. I have a PPP for the business, for Chicostart business, and I also have a PPP for a home business from U.S. Bank. And so I can tell you that the communications I've gotten from both, and I'm going to assume, Sonia, you're also getting them that say, hey, we know you might be in the forgiveness zone, but we don't have the application ready yet, and we will definitely get it to you when we do. So I'd have to say the communications letting us know that these forgiveness applications aren't ready yet has been great.
No, U.S. Bank has been really good.
The communications have been great. It's just about, I think a lot of people are kind of on that kind of pins and needles, like I'm physically telling you I'm trying to physically demonstrate how I feel right at the moment, because we want to, in not a bad way, but just kind of in an anxious way, because we want to make sure that we're ready to get that done in a very timely manner once we get them. Right. And that's also going back to what I said a moment ago about making sure you're in lockstep with whoever your accountant or CPA is, and things like that. The other advice we give people is, and I'll use this as an opportunity to make a segue there, is to have a separate account if you can, and if it's just a separate account for where you have that money, right, and only draw from that, right, for the eligible items. so it's just a lot easier to track. And I know with US Bank, they put it in a separate account for you. But then it's up to you to move it around however you want. But that just makes things cleaner. And then you can also track it in, say, a lot of people are using QuickBooks or other software. That just makes it a lot cleaner. So for those of you not using accountants and not using CPAs, I highly recommend that your memo space and your chart of accounts and your et cetera, all reference that. But
yes, please do that, because we have to be able to verify that the money was used for the purposes that are in the parameters of the program. And if we can't verify that, then it turns into a loan and it's not forgiven. And that it could be that a portion of it is not forgiven and a portion of it is forgiven. So it's not all or nothing, but your ability to show through paper trail what those funds were used for is going to be very important during your forgiveness application process.
Just a quick clarification. I'm a little confused about the 8 weeks versus 24 weeks. So just for example, if I got a loan for $30,000, let's say, I now have 24 weeks to spend that, or what exactly was originally I had 8 weeks to spend that. Okay, now I have 24. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, just to make sure.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and I think one of the challenges, again, this is just me speaking off of my own thought process. One of the challenges when the program rolled out was you were allowed to apply for up to 2.5 months of payroll, but then you only had 8 weeks to spend it. So that provided a lot of challenges to business owners. And so extending that out to 24 weeks, hopefully will give those business owners the opportunity to actually use the funds that are within the parameters of the program and not have it turn into a loan.
I have a question. This is Helen.
Hi, Helen.
Hi. So I utilize Chase, which is my business account, and actually don't have any loan documents, which is a little crazy making, and did follow up with them, and they said they would be coming. They have not come yet. And I do get statements saying that I don't owe them anything at this time, but I've never actually signed a loan document. And so when the money deposited, which there was no communication before it just hit my account, I did get an email saying that was about to happen, and it did. And I was at that time, which was the beginning of May, was in the world of 8 weeks. So I did draw a check from my business account to my personal account, and I did utilize the memo area saying that this was payroll for, let's say, May, based on my previous tax return. And it's just one person with no other real expenses apart from my payroll. So I have, I drew the 2 large checks for May and June and did it exactly the same way. But I'm not sure that's, now that there's 24 weeks, yes, they did give me more than 2 months, but not 2.5. It was kind of a weird number, but okay, somewhere in between. So I don't really know what to do with the balance because I don't really have very many other business expenses because I don't rent a space. And I don't really have a lot of utilities and, things that I believe are qualifying items. So I'm just wondering if I'm looking at the 24 weeks, if I should be drawing another check for, let's say, July for the balance, because that's what it would be. It would certainly not be the same amount as May and June, but should I draw another check to myself, deposit it into my personal account that is the remaining of that balance?
Eva, I'm going to let you advise on this one.
This is where I speak up, right? This is where I speak up. Okay. Yes, the answer is yes. You can pay, what you might have heard in my voice earlier when I was talking about percentages, and I emphasized things like 75% or more can be used for payroll and 25% or less, and now it's, 60% or more. So in other words, you can use 100% for payroll if you want.
So I'm not going to be able to go beyond my, I'm not going to utilize 24 weeks because once I use my smaller balance now, you know, which I think would only be a third of the month or whatever the number is, that if I just draw one more check at the end of this month, for example, all funds are utilized. As I said, it's a very simple business model that I have, one individual as an independent contractor.
Right. Yes, and that's fine. And again, following the same guidelines that sounds like you've already been doing, where you're doing the draw from there to here, and then putting in the memo line. This is the PPP, and you're using it for payroll. Absolutely. And then, you know, the minute that your bank comes out with a loan forgiveness, you're ready to go because you're done.
Well, they have been good. Chase have been good about communicating in regards to, you know, emails saying, initially, oh, don't hold your breath was the initial emails. Then, oh, we've got some more money, but I doubt you'll be successful given how many people are looking for those funds. Then it was like, oh, you are successful, and 3 days later, the money and then nothing else in regards to loan documents, which is very concerning to me, and I'm not even sure that is possibly legal. And the terms, and I just don't know how that's possibly legal, but okay, that's where we are. So I'm just moving forward, and in regards to showing that documentation, all I can show is bank statements from one bank to another, and I did do copies of my checks, photocopies of my checks to myself, and I don't know if there's any more I can do because I don't need to utilize a QuickBooks, or, you know, my business is such a simple model of me just sitting at my desk working.
Right. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right, Helen. I mean, I'm concerned you don't have loan docs either, but, you know, I cannot advise on that. I can tell you though, as long as you keep your record clean, I do emphasize this with people all the time to ad nauseum about record keeping. And again, since you're a single, you know, a sole proprietor or independent contractor, et cetera, you do have a simple model. And because they made it so simple from the program perspective, that you could use, you know, XYZ amount or more, up to 100% for payroll, and XYZ amount or less, right? You're totally covered. You don't have the issues that a lot of other companies are going to have. And kudos to you for keeping such good records already.
Thank you. They did send me another email saying, you know, that I would be able to utilize as an independent contractor or self-employed, something to that effect, that I would be able to use the easy form that has come out, the easy form that is going to be coming out, that would allow me to apply for forgiveness.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm excited to see whatever this easy form is, because, you know, any company, I don't know of any banks that are issuing these loan forgiveness applications yet. Do you, Phil?
I'm not aware of any. I know that you're going to see a range of processes. Some banks were using the SBA's application from their website and having their customers fill it out and turn them in. Other banks were doing it through an online process. Other banks were doing some combination of the two. So, it's going to be pretty specific.
It looks like this, the SBA one.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know, 11 pages. It's
one thing that I would advise,
ridiculous.
if you go on the SBA's website and download their forgiveness application, fill out that information, even if your bank is not using that form and they have an electronic process that you're going to be completing, you should have the information prepared to upload, and it will still hopefully make that a little bit more efficient for you. So not necessarily a bad thing. We have had a couple customers that I've been aware of going into one of our branches and handing a packet saying, here, my CPA gave this to me. It's off of the SBA's website. It's my application for forgiveness. And we've had to let them know, well, you know, we're actually not processing a paper form. However, the good news is you've got all your documents ready. As soon as you get that email, you'll be able to upload them and get through this efficiently.
And I will also add, Helen, and to anybody else who might think of looking at the SBA site with this stuff, that in some cases, or a lot of cases, it can cause more confusion. And so if you're eligible for something like an easy form of some sort, one, it's a good exercise if you want to do it. Sure, okay, but it read an email full of questions to me. So it is not straightforward. I guess I'll leave it at that. And it's like doing IRS forms. It's like, a W-2 has what, 5 boxes you got to fill out, but yet it's got 3 pages of instructions and a worksheet and some other stuff. Yeah, it's a, shoot me now is kind of how I feel. But again, if you want to go through, I don't discourage it per se. I'm just saying you might save yourself some time and some stress if you, it doesn't matter. Yes, use this as a guideline of what to gather per fill, right? And have ready. But I wouldn't worry about filling this out per se. And I'll stop there.
And Eva, do you know, I'm not sure if you've had a chance to glance through. I think I remember seeing somewhere on the SBA's page that canceled checks were one of the acceptable documents to show.
Yes,
so
correct.
I think that speaks directly to Helen's question. And exactly. I just wanted to see if you could confirm or advise on that canceled checks will be able to be used.
I can confirm that.
Okay, thank you.
Electronic file from the bank?
Well, actually, no, what I would have handy is all of your records, while you have canceled checks handy, I would just scan them and make sure that you have that as a file ready to go.
Well, I'm not really sure what a canceled check is because I don't really, I don't do that in that. That's not a form that I usually.
Oh, I'm sorry, Helen. So a canceled check. So say you wrote yourself a check, right, for your owner's draw, and once it goes through the bank and it's been processed, there is
electronic version of that.
Yes, correct. And
that I do understand, but I don't. I have utilized that online, but I don't have any duplicates of a check or returned from the bank. It's electronically. I do have seen access to that.
Okay.
Yeah. So all you have to do is go into the PDF and save the file as the check for payroll of that time frame, and that will be essentially your canceled check. It's just the proof that the check was written and where the funds went. And
it went through the account.
Yep.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. And just in another side note about Chase, I did speak to another individual, actually pretty much exact same situation as myself, like the same small business graphic designer in LA, happened to have Chase Bank, also did not get loan documents. So I thought, well, I wanted to know if I had fallen through the cracks in some way, but it was like, no, I think maybe this is how it is right now with them.
Helen, just to clarify, do you mean that you didn't get any loan documents that you signed, or do you mean that you never got a copy of the loan agreement once it was completed?
Neither.
Okay.
Yeah, she said like she didn't sign anything, and I was like, wow.
I know, and in my own defense, I was like, well, I've never had a business loan. I've never, what should I expect? And when I spoke to the bank, one person told me, oh, well, you did it online and that's your loan document. I thought, that doesn't seem like that makes sense to me. And then I followed up again, and another woman in a Chico branch was like, no, that's not correct. You should have gotten it. You will get it. And she gave me a time frame, but we have passed that time frame. So I'm not going to be following up again. Obviously, that doesn't make a lot of sense, but because I do know, not only did I get the funds, obviously, but I do know a loan exists, a loan number exists, and statements are being sent to me that tell me I do not owe them anything at this time. It just seems so odd from a legal standpoint that that just does not seem correct to me. I don't know if they have a leg to stand on. It's like I didn't sign a document. It's just very, very strange.
Eva, I think this might be a good time to start attorney practice for financial disputes.
You know, I wanted to be a lawyer, but then when I found out how many years it was going to take, I was like, I need to make money now. So, like, but you know what? This might be. I think we'll contact one of our friendly lawyers, Miss Jessica Henman, and ask her to perhaps. We actually have two resources. One would be Jackie McLean, who is going to be doing a webinar soon on HR and legal implications of the PPP and COVID and some other things, because they're intertwined, and that's for larger companies, obviously, for the most part, when you're talking about employee issues and things like that. But there's also some program issues around that. And then I think what I'll do is, per this conversation, I'll reach out to Jessica Henman and ask her if she'd like to speak on perhaps some of the legal ramifications of the PPP and perhaps what that means from the standpoint of a small business. And so, yeah, stay tuned. Well, we'll look.
All right, well, I gotta run, but thank you all very much. This was super helpful.
Sonia, thank you. Good to see you. All right. Tim, you want to do the wrap up?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Phil. That was a lot better information. At least a few things that I am understanding a lot better, even being in the office, listening to Eva talk about it daily with different people. So between the two of you and the questions from Sonia and Helen were very helpful, because I get asked questions about it and I say, please go to sba.gov for all continuing updates as it happens daily. So thank you for your time. Thank you for putting it together. And Eva, thank you for co-hosting with it. I appreciate it. So if anyone would like a copy of this, it's recorded. I'll share it on our resource page along with the links and the slides if you'd like to have those later. So thank you for your time. Tune in next week for our next weekly webinar, and it's going to be a Grow with Google next week. We are booked out till the end of, I think, end of August now. So we have a lot of stuff coming up. Please look at our weekly webinar schedule on our resource pages and events at chicostart.com, because we are hosting all of our different partners workshops as well. And there's lots of good information out there for you. So thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you for showing up, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you,
Thank
Phil.
you, guys.
Thank you.
Stop sharing.